So welcome to week 10 of COM226, and this is Business Analytics. Professor Marc-André Léger of the John Molson School of Business. So when talking about business analytics, we have to start by understanding what we're trying to achieve. The end game, the goal is to develop decisions. So we need information and able to make decisions because we want to manage organizations in a scientific way, right? Not as artists who are, using our gut feeling to make all our decisions. Again, what I do want to point out that instinct or intuition is not a bad thing, and it doesn't certainly have a role to play in management. But we want to use data, and we want to make evidence-based decisions. So we need tools to help us with that because of the amount of data that is getting larger and larger. We have access to more and more data. And so we're going to want to use different tools and techniques in order to do that. And this is what business analytics is about. Using the data to be able to describe what's happening in the organization, to predict possible scenarios, future outcomes, and from that to develop prescriptive models that are going to help us in the future. And then, of course, another aspect of it is communication, to be able to communicate the decisions, the recommendations, and explain the logic that is behind these decisions. So one of the ways that we do that is by doing business intelligence. So data analytics is what we're doing, and business intelligence is one part of this process. So it's the technologies and the processes that we use when we are doing analytics. So we're going to use the tools, specifically BI designed tools that exist for gathering, storing, assessing, and analyzing all of this data. Again, here, this is one of the components of data analytics. And this is important to us because, as managers, we need to make decisions and we need tools that are going to be able to help us. So this is what we're trying to achieve in this process. So we need to understand a little bit better what is the role of the manager. And there's a lot of different models that we can use for that. The one that's mentioned in the book that we're using for this course is the idea of management as a process that we're using, so that organizations are using to help us achieve our goals. And we do that through using resources. And we have a certain number of resources that are easily available to us. So human resources, people; financial resources, money; material resources, so the equipment, the things that we can buy and sell and use; and then of course data, the information. Those are the four main resources that we're going to be using at this point. As you guys go on in your education and your career, you're going to find that this is going to become a lot more detailed. But at this point, if we can focus on those four, I think we can get a pretty good idea of what it is that we're talking about. So as managers, we really have, at a high level, two things that we're looking at. The first one is efficiency, and the other one is effectiveness. And it's very, very important for us, for you guys, to understand what is it exactly that we're talking about here. So those of you, undergraduates who will be continuing into graduate education, doing an MBA perhaps, this is going to be a really, really important concept that you're going to be using a lot when you get at a more strategic level in organizations. So the first thing is efficiency. And efficiency can be easily defined as the ratio between the inputs and the outputs. So if we can increase the number of outputs using the same inputs, or if we can reduce the number of inputs required for producing a certain output, we are improving efficiency. And so this is one of the potential measures of our productivity. It's something that is very often mentioned as a measure of productivity is this idea of being more efficient. So that is always comes down to this ratio of inputs and outputs. And if we think of what we said before, these inputs could be human resources, financial resources, material resources, or data. Right? If we can produce more with less, or if we can produce more with the same, we are improving our efficiency. So this is a very important aspect, and definitely technology, and in particular in the context of this course, business technology can definitely help us to improve efficiency. So this is a very important concept for us. We need to make sure that we understand the difference between efficiency and effectiveness. Effectiveness has to do with achieving our goals. So how good are we at reaching our goals? How good are we at implementing our strategy? Because very often the measure of success is not necessarily having the best strategy, but often it is being the best possible at implementing this strategy. How good are we at executing our strategy? So that is also very often, correlated with success. If we are good, we may not necessarily have the best strategy in the world. Somebody else might have a better strategy. But if we're better than them at executing our strategy at the tactical level, there's a good chance that we're going to do really, really well. So this is an important aspect of making the difference between how well we use resources, efficiency, and how good we are at achieving our goals, effectiveness. So do keep that in mind as a very important concept. So when we're thinking about decision and decision making, and how as managers we need to make decisions, we need to understand that we have choices to make, and there's many possible choices, probably an infinity of different choices, and so we need to try to identify which is the best decision that we could be making. As well, we need to understand that we're always making decisions all day long, some important decisions, some less important decisions. So we have to think about this decision-making process. How can we try to make this as scientific or as systematic as possible so that we can limit the effect of subjectivity? Because subjectivity in a certain way is our enemy. If we rely too much on our instinct, then maybe sometimes we're going to make really, really good decisions based on instinct, but not necessarily. See, when we look at successful managers, we look at people like Warren Buffett, for example. We see that people like that make their decisions based on facts, based on evidence, based on a structured thought process at how they arrive at these decisions. And they may not necessarily make the absolute best decision every time, but on the long run, we find that this is the most successful approach. So this is what we're trying to be. We're trying to be more like Warren Buffett, I guess is probably the best way to put it, right? We want to focus on, try to be as objective as possible in our decision-making process, and we want to attack this decision-making process in a systematic manner. So our job as a manager, as it relates to the business making process, the decision making process, is what we're going to be talking about. Understanding that we have three basic roles as managers, or as mentioned by Professor Mintzberg of McGill. The three basic roles of the manager. There's some interpersonal roles, so managing people. Some informational roles, how we manage information, how we gather information, and then decisional roles. So as on the basis of information, we make decisions. And so as managers, we're being called upon on making decisions. Our employees are going to come to us, the stakeholders are going to come to us asking us to make a decision. So how can we do that? So if we look at the process and the phases of decision making, there's a whole bunch of different models, and here we're looking at a relatively simple, easy to understand model. So we start by looking at what's going on, right, in the intelligence phase, where we're going to examine a situation. We're going to try to identify and define the problem or the opportunity that we're faced with. Now, based on that, we're going to then move on to the design phase. So we're going to construct a model to address the situation, and then we're going to do this by making a certain number of assumptions that are going to be used to simplify the reality and express the relationship among all of the different variables that we have to deal with. And then once we've done that, we're going to try to validate the model by using test data. And then once we get the results from the test, this is going to inform our process. We're going to allow us to rethink a little bit of the intelligence phase. And then we're going to develop some criteria for evaluating all of the potential solutions that are proposed. So one possible way that we might do that is by developing scenarios. So we're going to create some scenarios of different things, different solutions, different problems, different things that could occur, and then what would be the potential outcomes of these different scenarios. And all of this is going to lead us to the choice. So in the choice phase, we're going to look at, select some of the potential solutions, look at courses of action that seem best suited to resolve the different problems that we're faced with. And once we've identified what we think is the best solution, then we're going to implement it. And based on the implementation, then we're going to look at, okay, how did this do? What was the result of that? And so, and then from that, either we succeed or we fail. So that will lead us to rethink, adjust, or improve the process, or to improve our decision-making process. So this is the basic way at high level of how we're going to do this. Of course, represented here is a more manual process. So we're going to think about, are there possible tools or methods or things that we could use, things that we want to talk about. So there's different tools that can be used for computerized decision analysis. This is still evolving. This is still relatively embryonic. Is that a word? Embryonic. So at early stages. This is that's been developed for a while, and certainly now with the big advances in artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning in the last few years, this is becoming closer to be a reality. And so you as students is something that you're going to be confronted with. You're going to be seeing evolve dramatically, and probably in the next 2 to 10 years. So what are the different tools that we're going to be able to do that? So when we're looking at these type of tools and decision support tools or systems or solutions that are being developed, we do have to understand a little bit about what is our role as a manager. The kind of categories of decisions that we need to make, operational controls, right, about how we execute our tasks the most efficient and effective way, how we exercise control as managers, so making sure, putting in place mechanisms to ensure that it's being done efficiently. And then the planning aspects of our role. So we have to make decisions about the future, allocating budgets, for example, increasing increasing resources in certain areas, or being able to take advantage of future opportunities, future markets. Keeping in mind that there's different types of decisions that are relating to these different natures of decisions that we have to do. And we could basically boil these down into structured and unstructured, and then sort of between the two, semi-structured. Structured decisions for us in technology are probably the easiest ones, because structured decisions, we can actually, determine some kind of algorithm that is going to be able to describe how the optimal decision can be made. So, for example, if I'm analyzing future projects and I can create a calculation of what is the internal rate of return of this project, and then I can make a decision based on, okay, my minimum internal rate of return for this type of project is going to be, let's say, 10%. And so a project of less than 10% would not be approved. A project of more than 10% might be approved. And here I'm just throwing a number. The number, would obviously, the actual number would be based on the organizational culture, the philosophy of the organization. But this gives you an idea of these kind of structured resources, so decisions. So I could make a structured decision where I have a certain ratio of IT staff to computers set up in my organization, or IT staff to number of users in my organization. And as the number of users increase at every certain, maybe every 20 new users, I add an IT resources. So that's would be a structured decision. An unstructured decision would be, because it's very difficult, there's just so many variables that it makes it impossible to determine or to create like a formula or an algorithm, or to very circumscribe what is the actual process, what are the actual outcomes that are considered to be acceptable. And so deciding to hire one person, an employee, a salesperson, or Mr. A or Mr. B, there's going to be a lot of too many variables. It's something that's going to be very, very difficult to put in a structured manner. But between the two, I could have something semi-structured, so something that where I could help in part of the decision-making process. So choosing to invest in a certain stock, for example, may be very difficult to fully structure, and it's definitely not unstructured. But perhaps in a semi-structured fashion, I could use in technology to help me to narrow down the number of choices that I have. So in the end, as a manager, I'm going to be given a certain number of options, and then my choice will be to make choices between the different options that I have. So these are really the three types of problem structures that we can break down to. So remember, two, really important, structured, completely structured. So I can create a model, I can modelize the thing, I can do calculations, I can use statistics, algorithms, formulas. And then completely unstructured based on my gut. And ideally, I want to make those decisions as structured as possible, so I might end up sort of in the middle ground, which is the semi-structured. So do keep that in mind. The actual process of business analytics, so gathering data, getting all of the data together, and then going through a process which is very important to us in the context of this course is in the middle here, the ETL process, extract, transfer, and load. So we're getting all this data. We're getting the data from, if you remember from our previous course, we're talking about legacy systems and silos. And so we want to get all this data from the different silos, from the different databases, from the different systems. And we want to extract this data, make it ready to go into into a different format, so the transfer, and then we want to load it into a data repository, which is our data warehouse. So the data warehouse is the tool that we're going to be using to store a copy of our operational data so that we can use this for business analytics, to do business intelligence, to try to answer questions. We definitely don't want to do that from the operational systems. So this is where the data warehouse is going to be useful for us. Once we've created the data warehouse, we can also create specialized subsets of the data warehouse. So because the data warehouse can be very huge, rather than having all of the data accessible to everyone, also for security purposes, then I could create a subset where I only have marketing data, for example, in a data mart. So the data mart is a specialized portion, subsection of the data warehouse. I could have one for finance. I could have one for human resources. I could have one for marketing. I could have one for my operations. All of the different components of our value chain that we've talked about many times before. We could have, for different departments, for different functional areas of our organization, we can have a subset of the data warehouse. So the data warehouse is the global thing, but it has so much information. And of course, you can easily run into security issues as well. If you give everyone access to the data warehouse, it's going to be very difficult to control. So that's where we could do this area of the data marts. So using this data in the data warehouse and the data marts, we could actually use different tools and techniques to be able to find information in there. So we could use something called data mining, for example. In data mining, we're going to, just like, if we're mining operations for diamonds, we're going through all this dirt trying to find the diamonds. That's the same thing here. We're going through all the data to trying to find the information that gives particular value. So we're creating value from this data. Perhaps we can identify new markets, new business opportunities. We can even just create new products from the data itself, like reselling data, for example, or identifying new business opportunities. So that's something that data mining can be useful for. DSS, decision support systems, using historical data in the data warehouse to help us to make decisions. We can use artificial intelligence, so AI, machine learning, deep learning, to be able to use the information again to help us make decisions. And then we can use, basically what you've learned in your stats class, statistical models, also to create value to help us to understand, based on the historical data, what's our situation, how effective and efficient we are, and then improve how we manage our business. So from this information, once we've applied these techniques, we can then create some models. And as we said, descriptive models, so models that describe what we're doing. Predictive models that will help us to understand how things will be in the future based on how they've been in the past. And then prescriptive models that help us to figure out how we should be doing things, how we could improve. So just like, prescription is medicine, the doctor will give you medicine to try to improve your future situation. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about here. And then finally, how we can use this information, present this information so that it could be easily understood by humans. So creating reports, creating dashboards, something that we have spoke about before in the past. So different presentations tool. I'm going to show you some examples. The dashboard that we looked at in class before. So different kinds of dashboards. This is a Bloomberg terminal for stock market information. This is a management cockpit, so sort of a war room scenario where we're going to be providing a lot of information to managers. So these are the kind of things that we're talking about. So this was a short presentation on the data analytics. So thank you.